I sat on the edge of the cliff, overlooking my city like some comic book vigilante. The solitude that I sought in coming here was not to be. I needed silence. I wanted the world to be still, just for a moment, so that I could collect my thoughts. Even up here, I could see the city buzzing. I could feel the vibrancy of its life, noisy life. Beneath me, the sounds of that vibrancy echoed through the open air as it found me. I couldn't escape it. Only death would provide the silence that I needed. I could hear the blaring of sirens wailing loudly, as if crying over the fate of an unfortunate victim. Planes rumbled as they tore through the air. Even the invisible animals around me seemed to be in a commotion. The hooting of owls, the howling of coyotes, even the barking house dogs filled the air. The city lights twinkled in the distance with untold stories. Some of them would be erotic in nature. Others would be violent and messy. There were even stories that would be a combination of both. Quite literally, thousands upon thousands of stories were unfolding at this very moment. For instance, earlier in the evening, there was a woman who was laying out clothes for a date. She had a vast wardrobe in her obscenely large closet to choose from. She opted for a brand new cocktail dress that she'd recently bought. She didn't have an event in mind when she bought it. She just saw it, had to have it, and purchased it without a second thought. She often did things like that. The numbers on the price tag were insignificant to her. I doubt she even glanced at it. No matter how much she used her credit card, it was never denied. It was almost like magic, an endless well that never ran dry. This lucky woman was preparing to look her absolute best. She wanted her date to appreciate her beauty. What woman doesn't want that? She chose her favorite lingerie that would lift her breasts and create cleavage that men loved to stare at. Her $150 perfume was ready to be spritzed in key places to give a subtle, yet intoxicating, aroma. She took a long, leisurely bath with scented bath salts. Then, she carefully styled her hair and applied her makeup with an artist's precision. After that, she dressed in front of a full-length mirror, making sure that everything was perfect. Her cell phone rang, resulting in a short interruption to the ceremony. She took a quick look at the screen, smiled knowingly, and answered with a throaty, seductive greeting. The conversation was brief, yet it was heavy with suggestive possibilities. When she was done putting herself together, she did one final twirl in the mirror. She liked the reflection that looked back at her as her confident smile showed. She strolled out of the room with an extra bounce in her step and headed out into the night. Why did I give such an exhaustive description of her preparation? Because the meticulous manner in which she prepared for a night out was something that was very odd, considering the fact that her husband was out of town. Could a woman go through all this preparation for a casual rendezvous with friends? Sure, it's possible. However, it wasn't likely in this case. How do I know? Because I knew this woman, and more importantly, who she was going to see. I understood why she waited until her husband was out of town before she made plans with this person. Her flirty conversation confirmed my worst fears. It opened doors to areas inside of me that I didn't know existed. Angry, hateful areas. It made me sick to my stomach to even think about. She disgusted me. I loved her with everything I had. I owed her everything. But at the moment, she was all that I hated about women. I know that I'm not supposed to think that way. Men are taught to respect women. It's our job to love, protect, and cherish them, even to understand them. That might really be too big of a task for most men to accomplish, but we try anyway. We are taught to put women on a pedestal. Even at an early age, boys are told that girls are sugar and spice, and everything nice. The very first woman we meet is our mother, who gave birth to us. And then we pick a woman to be our life partner who will hopefully give birth to our children. These benevolent actions are supposed to require our reverence. But, if you think about it, the story is incomplete. After all, do they create life on their own? What is an egg without a sperm? I'll tell you what it isn't. It isn't a baby. So what do we owe women, really? Respect? Absolutely. The same respect that we should have for people in general. But why is it that so many people feel that we owe them more respect than we owe men? They don't say that in as many words, but society in general places a higher value on women's lives than men's. In sitcoms and comedies about family life, the wives are always these hot, sexy, savvy women who have the unfortunate task of cleaning up after, or fixing the messes of, the bumbling buffoons that they are married to. Father Knows Best has been replaced with the likes of Everybody Loves Raymond, not throwing shade on that show. I actually like it. It's just an example. What does all this mean? It means that we treat the ladies as if everything they do and say is above reproach. What they say is supposed to be treated like gospel, even if it isn't right. They are only wrong when they want to admit it. Actually, forced to admit it after exhausting all other possibilities. Other times, men are told to keep their mouths shut if they want peace. Why has questioning women, or holding them responsible for the things that they say or do, become synonymous with misogyny? They do it to us all the time. Why is it that double standards are wrong, unless they are ones that favor the fairer sex? When men cheat, they are labeled the worst kind of human. When women cheat, it is often assumed that the husband failed her. When a man hits a woman, he is an abusive creep who belongs in jail. No need saying I am defending abuse, because I sure as hell am not. But if a woman hits a man, we wonder what he did to deserve it. Calling a man a dick is part of pop culture. Calling a woman a bitch is obscene, even when said in response to being called a dick. Why am I rambling? Do I hate women? Is this the whining monologue of a wronged man who now views the opposite gender with disdain? Am I a misogynist? Do you see how asking fair questions spirals into being labeled? Before you stop reading and write me off as some woman-hating, anti-feminist right-winger, I need to tell you why I'm sitting on this cliff asking these questions. My entire view on the world was completely destroyed this afternoon. Everything that I was taught as a young man was turned on its head in a matter of minutes. All the things that my parents told me about marriage was a lie. My mom told me lies about what to expect if you treat women well. My dad told me lies about being a real man. They shaped my view of what life should be like once I got married. They were the reason I was sitting on the edge of this cliff, literally and figuratively. I think I need to go back to the beginning. Maybe then we can understand how I got here. We can see how I came to be standing on this cliff. 4 years ago. That's a fine woman you have there, son. Take care of her. Respect her. Be the man that I taught you to be. My dad beamed with pride as he told me this. He pulled me in for a manly embrace, giving me a stern pat on the back as he did so. I will, Dad. I will. We stepped back after the brief hug. As we stood in one of the back rooms of the church, dressed in matching tuxedos, we waited for the appointed time to make our way down the aisle to my future. I could hear the excited hubbub of the crowd in the sanctuary. Where's Mom? He smiled and snickered. You know your mother. She's barking orders at the bridesmaids, driving everyone crazy. Even the priest got a taste. A look of concern came across my face. Dad, please, don't let her drive Tabby crazy. Especially not today. This is about me and her, not about Mom. You know how she gets when everything has to be perfect. Son, relax. Your mom is just excited, and she's trying to make sure that everything goes well. She's been dreaming of this moment since she held you in her arms for the first time. Dad. Son, look at me. My dad interrupted with a stern voice as he placed both of his hands on my shoulders. He took a deep breath, indicating that he wanted me to do the same. I followed his lead. You're nervous. I know what you're going through. I went through it myself. Every man goes through it. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried. I nodded to acknowledge what he'd said and took another deep breath. Calm down. He continued. There is nothing that is going to keep Tabby from marrying you. Nothing. She loves the hell out of you. Even your mother can't drive her crazy enough to make her change her mind. You're right, I said, trying to quell my nerves. My stomach was in knots. This was it. The moment of truth. I would pledge my life to Tabitha and officially vow to always be faithful to her. I loved Tabby with all my heart. I didn't want any woman but her. Still, it was a little overwhelming to think about being her husband for the rest of my life. After all, I was only 23. If I lived to be 85, the rest of my life would be 62 years. What if my love for her wasn't strong enough? What if I wasn't a good enough husband? What if she looked back and realized that she made a horrible mistake marrying me? What if someone better came along? What if? My dad must have read the dark thoughts I was having. Once again, he broke me out of them. I want you to think about me and your mother. Look at us. I've been married to her for 17 years, and not a day goes by that I regret it. You and her are the most precious things I have, and my life would be empty without you in it. I love her just as much as I did when I saw her in her wedding dress. She is my everything. Things haven't always been easy between us. After all, I'm 9 years older than her. The age difference makes it somewhat tough for us at times. We struggle, we fight, but we've always made it through. She knows that I'm not going anywhere. After it's all said and done, we each know that we have a lifelong partner in the other. Nothing is going to split us apart. I won't let it. Neither will she. Trust me, son. You want that. When you wake up decades from now, and your son is walking down the aisle, you will proudly say the same thing to him. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't let them fall, though. I had my pride, after all. Instead, I sniffed quickly and sidestepped any awkward show of emotion by jokingly asking, What if I have a girl? It took him a moment to realize what I did, but he went along with it. He smiled and said, "Then you keep trying until you get a boy. I want a grandson." "Yes, sir. If I have to have sex with Tabby every day, I will do that for you." His face screwed up a little when I said that. So I asked, "Too much?" "Yeah, a little," he said quickly with a short nod. Then we bust out laughing as he shook his head in fake disgust. I was so glad that he was back here with me. I couldn't have chosen a better best man. He was the only man that I even considered having at my side. Even my best friend Robbie wasn't in the running compared to my dad. Henry was technically my stepdad. My real father left when I was 2. I never got a straight story on the exact circumstances surrounding his decision to abandon us. My mother mentioned him as little as possible. The only thing I could remember vaguely was my stepdad marrying my mother when I was 6, and they'd been dating for a year before that. So, Henry was the only dad I knew. He was the example of what a real man is supposed to be. The wedding went off without a hitch. Tabby was truly the most beautiful woman in the room. When I saw her, all my doubts melted away. I knew that I'd made the best choice. I said my vows to her, meaning every single word. I listened as she said hers. Tears of happiness streamed from her eyes as she did. When I was finally able to kiss the bride, I made a promise to myself to never let her go, and I never did. Throughout the 4 years of my marriage, my parents were there for me. For both of us, really. They guided us through our first big argument. My mom taught Tabby a few things about cooking a Thanksgiving meal, and my dad was always ready with advice for me. Our marriage was everything it was supposed to be, and my parents had a big part in that. I tried to be the husband to Tabby that Dad was to Mom. His favorite saying was, "A happy wife makes for a happy life." He lived his life around that motto. He taught me the importance of always taking care of your woman. Now, I know that all of that was a crock of shit. Present. Until today, I thought my dad was the wisest man on the earth. Until today, I was trying to model my marriage after his and Mom's. Until today, I had it all. I had a beautiful life with a beautiful wife. Both of my parents were alive. I worked side by side with my dad, who owned a chain of computer shops. Our shops repaired computers, but our most lucrative business came from selling custom computers or parts online. Most of our customers were hardcore gamers, or people who needed quality computers. Our website was engineered to assist the customer with what she needed, whether they were a computer guru or somebody who was putting together their first computer. We did well. Was I just blind? Did I fail to see all the warning signs? Was life just so good that trouble was an impossibility? As I looked over the side of the cliff, I saw nothing but a sheet of darkness directly beneath me. The faint city lights twinkled and danced in the distance, but the only thing that greeted me under my feet was nothingness. No answers, no reprieve from the earth-shattering realization I now faced. What was I to do? How could I continue with my relationship knowing that everything it was built on was a lie? Earlier this afternoon, I love Sundays. My weeks revolved around them. Most people live for Saturdays, but my guess is that those people aren't married. My Saturdays were designated for Tabby. On these days, I would render my services to her. Honey-do lists, dates nights, taking her shopping so that I could provide a man's opinion, as well as the credit card. Whatever she needed of me, I was there. But Sundays were the holiest of days, and I'm not talking church. On Sunday, I could do what I wanted. It was sort of an unwritten rule that just fell into place. Tabby understood this, even if it was subconsciously, so she usually found other things to do. During the cold months, I had football. In the summertime, I would take leisurely trips on my Ducati. Other things I did was work on my truck, go to the gym, hang out with my best friend Robbie, or just sit around in my boxers and do nothing. Sounds pretty fantastic, doesn't it? This Sunday was supposed to be an exception to that. My dad and I had to go out of town to meet with representatives of a company that had just acquired one of our main suppliers. One of the first things the buyer did was raise prices on many parts that we bought from them. This would greatly affect our profit margin. So, my dad arranged for a meet and greet in a central location. He brought me, as well as a few other key people. We were planning to negotiate and try to come to agreeable terms. Since we had a long-standing relationship with the former company, we were hopeful we'd be able to achieve that. This was an opportunity for me to get acquainted with the other guys, as well as meet the new owners. I didn't really know the other guys as well as Dad would have liked. Most of them were his age, so there was nothing to really bond over. Besides that, in their minds, I was just his son. Nothing more. Since I started working with Dad, he was grooming me to take a more active role. This was a great opportunity to reintroduce me to them as a key person. As fate would have it, this meeting was to take place during the worst weekend possible. Super Bowl 51 weekend. The Patriots had made it, once again, and I wanted to see Tom Brady make history with his 5th championship. Even though I knew the game really wouldn't be that interesting, and that the Patriots would just put the Falcons away early, I wanted to see it. The meeting was on Saturday, so the plan was to fly to the central location on Friday, have the meeting on Saturday, and get a flight back Sunday morning. Robbie always threw the best Super Bowl parties. In fact, he threw the best parties, period. It was just his thing. He was the fun friend. I was the responsible one. This dynamic hadn't changed since high school. We had a long-standing tradition of trying to watch the big games together. NBA Finals, Super Bowls, Final Four, etc. And we were both big Patriots fans. They'd been in 6 Super Bowls since Robbie started his tradition, and the 2 times I missed the party, they lost. My friends blamed me for those losses. They really did. If you don't follow sports, you won't understand. If you do, you can feel my pain. I had to be there. You know what they say about the best laid plans. As luck would have it, there were no available flights back home before kickoff. They were all booked. The only thing to do would be to reschedule the meeting, of course. That was my thinking. But the reps from the new company had other plans. No amount pleading to reschedule worked. They had busy schedules, and this was the only time they had available. Coincidentally, they were from Dallas. I'm sure that their lack of interest in the Super Bowl had nothing to do with the Cowgirls blowing it once again. My dad tried to cheer me up. He decided to throw a Super Bowl party in the suite that we rented. It was a nice gesture, and I tried to be appreciative, but I was still bummed out. Nevertheless, I was a team player. I put on a brave face and brought my A game. We arrived on Friday, and all of us strategized on how to approach the meeting. We wanted to make sure that we were on point and razor sharp. The next day, we had the meeting. Funny thing, we spent so much time perfecting our game plan that we inadvertently came to think of the reps as the enemy. We were prepared to play hardball and not trust a word they said. The reality was kind of anticlimactic. They were people like us. They didn't come in with expensive suits and condescending attitudes. They were warm, polite, open, and actually joked around with us. However, when we got down to the negotiation portion of the meeting, things did get serious. We told them what we wanted. They told us what they were authorized to do. My dad politely pointed out our reputation and how much business we had done with their predecessors. He insinuated that they wouldn't want to lose that business if they were unable to accommodate us. The reps had to get on the phone with their home office, and we eventually came to a favorable resolution. The pigs in Washington could learn a lot from small business people who disagree but listen to each other. Eventually they compromise and work things out in a way that satisfies everybody. But hey, we aren't politicians, are we? If it were easy, anybody could do it. But I digress. We were feeling pretty good about how things went. While I should have been happier, I was still pretty down about missing the party. The real party. I know Dad meant well, but Robbie's parties always turn out epic. He could make a bar mitzvah fun. Hanging out with a bunch of old guys in a suite didn't seem comparable. On top of that, if the Pats lost, I would be in deep shit. Not that there was any risk at all of them losing. The game would probably be over in the first half. But you can never be too cautious. Dad finally suggested that I get a flight to the neighboring city, rent a car, and simply drive the rest of the way home. I may not make it by kickoff, but I could at least catch the second half with my friend. You see, that's why I love him. I was able to change my flight after giving the airline a small fortune, of course, and reserve a compact vehicle for the drive. My dad and the other guys still wanted to stay and watch the game in the suite. They were veteran husbands. You know guys like them. They have been married for over a decade. They cherished the time away from the old ball and chain and squeezed out every ounce of freedom they could get. So, I was able to go home early. Isn't that always the setting for some life-altering discovery to be made? Stupid cliches. I hate them. In the end, it's always the little choices that add up. Maybe it's fate or just happenstance, but often we find that a small variance from a set path could have enormous consequences. I practically created a sonic boom with the Nissan Versa that I rented as I raced down the highway. I didn't realize those cars could drive so fast. I was listening to the game on the radio and was not happy. Not happy. The score was 14-0, and the Falcons had just intercepted the ball. I had to get there. I knew that Robbie and the rest of my buddies were cursing the ground that I walked on. It was almost halftime when I got home, and I found that Tabby wasn't there. I was hoping to surprise her, but then I remembered that she and my mom were supposed to hang out this weekend. I called her on her cell. She picked up on the second ring and greeted me like she always did. We had a pretty normal conversation. I decided to not let her know that I was home. I figured that if I kept my mouth shut, I wouldn't be expected to be in the house before curfew. I could make it to Robbie's before the second half started and then hang out with my buddies as late as I wanted. Hell, I could even stay the night at Robbie's, which was a green light for getting as drunk as I wanted. With the score being what it was, that seemed like it might be necessary. By the time she realized the change of plans, if she ever found out, I could simply play stupid and apologize for forgetting to let her know. Everyone reading this story can save the judgment. I'm sure hundreds of other men have done this and worse. I was getting ready to wrap the conversation up. I was thinking of a good exit strategy so that I could go to Robbie's. I asked, "You're with Mom, right?" I assumed she was, so I wasn't really looking for an answer. It was just a good segue to tell her, "Have fun, and I'll see you later." Yeah, I'm with Mom," she said in a strange voice after a hesitation. It immediately piqued my interest for some reason. The hesitation seemed odd, and the tone of her voice signaled a lie. Paying a little more attention, I asked, "Are you guys at our house, or my parents'?" I looked around the empty house to see if she would take the bait. "At their house." "Why?" she asked, a little defensive. I almost breathed a sigh of relief that she didn't say our house, but then I noted the combative tone. At first I was curious, but now I was alarmed. Something was definitely off about her. It was one of those things that was hard to describe, but if you know somebody you can sense it. "No reason. Just missing you, that's all," I said, trying to lower the tension. I didn't want to get into an argument. I knew how this conversation would go, and it would inevitably lead to me being frustrated but getting nowhere. "You guys got anything planned?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh yeah, you know us. We're some party animals," she joked sarcastically. Then she said, "Hey hun, I have to go." Was it me? Or was she rushing me off the phone? "Well, okay, sweetie. Make sure you use protection if you pick up any strange guys. I love you and I'll talk to you soon," I quipped before we ended the conversation. We often joked around like that, so I didn't think anything of it. That was until there was an extended pause before she answered again. "Love you too, Dre. Bye." I was already getting the keys and heading out the door. Why she was acting so peculiar? I had to find out. My parents' house wasn't very far from Robbie's, so it wasn't going to put me out too much to stop by on my way over. I didn't want to give up my freedom, but something was irking me. It was a risk that I had to take. I got to my folks' house, and since I had a key, I quietly let myself in. I expected to find Mom and Tabby in the living room, but it was empty. I quietly headed upstairs to see if they were in the bedroom watching TV or something. I didn't find them there either, but I found something else. The master bedroom was pretty large, so Mom didn't notice me lightly push the door open a crack. She was standing in front of the mirror, holding a dress in front of her. It was a cocktail dress. Very sexy. I tried to inconspicuously look around for my wife, but I didn't see her. A part of me wanted to make my presence known, but something was odd. My gut told me to be quiet for a moment and wait, so I did. I just watched her. She was humming as she looked at herself. In the background, I could hear bathwater running. On her vanity, her various makeup items looked like they were being prepared to be applied. For a woman whose husband was out of town, this seemed off. My world came crashing down around me when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, smiled, and picked it up. "What is it, Charles?" she said with mock annoyance. Her voice was flirty and playful. I gasped as a sick feeling hit my belly like a Bernard Hopkins jab. Charles was my biological father's name. He was the one that my mother never spoke of. She refused to answer any questions about him. I always assumed that he was long gone. Was this that Charles? If so, why was she speaking to him, and in that tone of voice? And if it was a different Charles, the same question still applied. It got worse. "You have been impatient for the 30 years I've known you, and it's not getting any better," she said in that tone again, answering my question and confirming my fears. "I'm getting ready now." She listened for a moment, and then she giggled. "God, you are so bad." "No, I'm not going to do that." "Okay, I'm not some street hooker, you know." More listening. Then, a giggle. "Yes, well, I'm not that easy, at least, not always. I'll admit that your charms do have a certain effect on me, but I'm a married woman. I can't go prancing around town with no panties on. You have a hard enough time keeping your hands to yourself as it is." She listened for a moment more, and then her face grew dark. Stop that. Stop that right now. I'm married to him. Okay? You had your chance with me, and you blew it. You walked out on me. I loved you with everything that I had to give, and you just left. I still love you. I'll admit that, but I'm a lot smarter now than I was back then. I may not love Henry the same way, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to leave him to be with you. Love isn't everything. I learned that the hard way. You taught me that. So, don't think that just because I give in to you every once in a while that you're getting a second chance. We have sex. That's it. If you can't deal with that, then feel free to go away. This time, you can stay gone. That was when my heart died. My mother, the woman I thought that all women should emulate, was a liar. She was a liar and a cheater. She was the kind of woman that she told me to stay away from. How could she do this to Dad? How could she do this to me? After all the years of lecturing me on how to treat a woman and telling me to look to my dad as an example of a real man. Is this how women treat real men? I should have confronted her. I should have burst into the room, screaming and yelling at her. But I didn't. I couldn't. No matter what she did, she was still my mom. So, I left. I simply cowered away, got in my car, and drove off. I drove aimlessly for a while, until I stopped here at this cliff. What was I to do? I wanted to stay safely on solid ground, figuratively speaking. I wanted to go back to my naive existence, but that was gone. They say that there are moments that make you grow up. A parent dying, a major illness of someone really close to you, or a breakup of a close relationship are usually at the top of the list. I was lucky in that regard. I had been spared those tragedies, at least for the moment, but this was just as bad. This was my moment, my crisis. I felt 10 years older than I had been when I rented a car to come home just a few hours ago. I couldn't bring myself to do what I knew I had to do. I had to jump. I had to plummet to the death that awaited me. The death that I was speaking of wasn't physical. The death that awaited me was the death of the ideals that I was taught. The death of a young boy who thought that his parents were perfect. I didn't know what would be below, how I would land, or what damage would result. All I knew was that something had to die. I had to jump and accept what was right in front of my face. I had to tell Dad. He had to know. It would hurt him and probably make Mom furious with me. Ironically enough, she raised me not to be a liar. I wasn't going to start now just because she was one. I would tell the truth. With that decision made, I got back in my car and drove home. It was getting pretty late anyway. I'd completely forgotten that I was supposed to be out of town, or that I was missing Super Bowl 51, something that I would later regret. Those who saw it know what I mean. When I walked in the door, Tabby was home. She did a double take before she came over to greet me. "Honey, I thought you were coming back tomorrow," she said as she hugged me. "Yeah, well, things didn't go as expected." I mumbled cryptically as I took my coat off. I trudged over to the couch to sit. Suddenly, I felt tired, like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. "Did everything go okay?" she asked with concern in her voice as she sat next to me. I didn't answer her with words. I just shook my head, and tears started to drip from my eyes. "Andre, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Is your dad okay?" All I could do was shake my head. Then she shakily asked, "Is he home?" I was so exhausted that I almost missed it. It was something so minor that it could have been overlooked. But my senses were tuned. Even subconsciously, I was on the lookout for all the clues that I'd missed over the years. I peered into Tabby's eyes. The hesitation in her voice when she asked if my dad were home was telling. But the look in her eyes was the final confirmation of my suspicions. She knew. "Where were you today?" I asked pointedly, drastically morphing my entire demeanor. The worn-down voice was replaced with a stern, inquisitive, possibly interrogative, tone. My eyes narrowed when I looked at her. The tears had stopped. I was still sad, but rapidly getting angry. I was remembering the conversation that we had earlier. She said that she was with my mother, at her house. That was a lie. "Huh?" she asked. Her expression could have been one of bewilderment, but what I saw was fear. "Earlier tonight, when I called, I asked where you were. You told me you were with Mom. Remember?" Oh, yeah. I was with her," she said quickly, her eyes shooting from side to side. "How long were you with her? What did you guys do? When did you leave?" I asked, not even trying to hide the accusatory tone of the questions. She nervously looked at me as she fumbled for words. "Andre, we were, why are you acting like this? Just answer the questions, Tabby. They should be easy. Just answer the goddamn questions." I yelled furiously as I jumped off the couch like it was on fire. My fists were clenched in balls so tight that my knuckles were red. Her face became a mask of fear and terror. She looked at me with eyes so wide one would have thought she was wearing bifocals. At first, she sat there stunned. But then she suddenly jumped up from the couch and ran to our bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I flopped back down on the couch, as if all the energy seeped back out of my body. I just sat there, letting the realization of things wash over me. Finding out about my mother was devastating. Knowing that Tabby was in on it was even worse. About 15 minutes later, she was back in the doorway of the living room. I didn't even hear her footsteps approach. "You know, don't you?" she asked, voicing the stupidest question I'd ever heard. "So do you," I responded curtly. I wasn't looking at her, but from the corner of my eye, I saw her nod sadly. Her expression was forlorn, with tear streaks running across her makeup. "So, were you ever going to tell me? Or were you going to continue to lie to me?" I asked with eerie calmness. "Andre, it's not that simple." "Really?" I turned to face her, looking her in the eyes. "It's not that simple? That's your answer for lying to me?" "Honey, I just didn't want you to get hurt. She's your mother. You look up to her. I knew that it would kill you." That justification pissed me off. "Bullshit, Tabby. Bullshit. You didn't just lie to protect me. You were covering for her." Tears started to stream down her face again as she silently cried. Normally her tears would have moved me, but now I just didn't give a shit. "It's not like that. I mean, I did lie to you, but She struggled to explain. When nothing came to her, she sighed sadly and wiped her hair out of her face. "I hated lying to you, Dre," she finally said as she looked down. I huffed and shook my head. "More bullshit, Tabby. You had no problem lying to me. No problem whatsoever. You did it so convincingly it makes me wonder what else you've been lying about." The crying stopped when I said that. She wiped the wetness from her cheeks and sniffled, but her eyes narrowed as they fell on me. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked with a tinge of anger in her voice. I didn't answer at first. I saw the impasse that we were headed for. I could have put this discussion on hold until my feelings were more stable. Perhaps I should have. But you know what? She was the one who lied to me, who knows how many times. She was the one wrong here. I was tired of being a patsy for the women in my life. I was tired of being the guy who always put their feelings above my own. That's Dad's way. Look what it got him. You never answered my question. Where were you today? "What are you implying?" she asked, taking a challenging step forward. Her eyes were locked onto mine. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you a question, one that you still haven't given me a straight answer to." "I was with my mom, if you must know," she said with attitude. "Mind if I call her to corroborate your story?" She looked like I slapped her in the face. "So now you don't trust me? Is she really offended because I don't trust her after catching her in a blatant lie? Really? Why would I trust a liar?" I asked coldly. The anger in her was so built up after I said that I wouldn't have been surprised if steam came out of her ears and made a high-pitched whistling sound. "You know what? You know what?" she yelled. Her lips were pursed and tight as she spoke. I waited for the second half of her statement, but it never came. I wasn't sure if she was just too angry to finish it, or she just didn't have anything planned past you know what. Instead, she just glowered at me. I wasn't done yet. "Speaking of being a liar, have you ever cheated on me?" She laughed sarcastically as she put her hands on her hips and shook her head. Then, her face twisted into an evil smile. "No, Andre, I've never cheated on you. I'm not a skank. Only your mother does that," she said as she sneered at me. There are no words to describe the surge of emotions that ran through me. Her words hit their mark with a sniper's accuracy. I was so angry that I couldn't formulate a clever comeback to shoot at her. I couldn't even dispute what she said, which made me even angrier. She crossed her arms and smirked at me, daring me to respond. She knew she got me good. Her arrogant demeanor pissed me off even further. "Screw you, Tabby, you're a liar. Worse still, you lied to protect a woman who is cheating. If a liar protects another liar who is a cheater, it's pretty logical to think the first liar is a cheater also." Her face became a mixture of confusion and irritation as she screeched, "What?" in a high-pitched voice. She sounded like what I said was so completely ridiculous that there was no response for it. Let me simplify it for you. Birds of a feather cheat together. You had no problem protecting a cheater, which makes me believe that you saw no problem with it. Hell, you even made sure it could happen by providing an alibi. The only person who would do that is one who has no problem with cheating. Tabby was about to lash out with a rebuttal, but she thought better of it. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Andre, I know that today was a big shock for you. Okay, I get it. Right now, you're saying things that you don't mean. So why don't we just go to bed and put this conversation on hold? I don't want us to say things that we can't take back." Her voice was consolatory in an attempt to calm me down. I saw it as patronizing. "No, Tabby, no, you don't get to do that," I said as I jabbed my finger in the air, pointing at her. "You lied to me. Do you get that? Is that sinking in? You lied to me, your husband. You lied to me to protect her, You don't understand shit because I never lied to you. So, don't sit there patronizing me like I'm some out-of-control kid who needs a timeout. That's not what I was doing, Andre, she said as she stepped forward and tried to touch me. I backed away from her like her skin was made of acid and slid past her. I heard her calling my name as I ran out the door, slamming it shut behind me. By the time I saw it open and her silhouette in the doorframe, I was already backing out of the driveway. With a squeal of the tires, she became a speck in the rearview mirror. Andre, I heard some disturbing news today. I was laying on my bed, playing Street Fighter 2 on my Super Nintendo when my mom entered my room. She stood in the doorway with her hands on her hips and a disappointed look on her face. What did I do now? I asked in an exasperated tone. I went through a mental checklist that all high school kids do when their parents are being vague about what crime they committed. Is it report card time? No, not for another month. Did I forget to clean the dishes? I didn't clean them, but we haven't eaten dinner yet. Did I get detention again? No. I've kept my nose clean ever since I got in trouble for the stink bomb in the girls' bathroom incident. I heard something about you making Christina Huntsmith cry the other day. Want to tell me what that was about? I was relieved that I wasn't in real trouble, so I casually said, "Oh yeah, that's nothing. We were dating for a while, but I broke it off with her." She started crying. That's all. Why did you break it off with her? She asked. I racked my brain for a legitimate answer. Somehow, I figured that saying, Christina doesn't put out, but Becky promised me a BJ, wouldn't have gone over too well. I just don't like her like that anymore, Mom. It's time to move on. I tried to be nice about it, but she got all emotional and started crying. Is there another girl? Talking about this with my mother seemed weird. All I could do was look at her sheepishly as I said, "Yeah, I kinda like Becky now." She looked at me like I said, "I kinda like Hitler." Wait a minute. You don't mean short skirt, tube top Becky, do you? Yeah. Andre, why would you break up with a nice girl like Christina for that girl? Because she promised me a BJ. Because we have more in common. I said aloud. She gave me a knowing look before she sat on my bed. Andre, she paused, as if she were trying to come up with the right way to say what she wanted. You can't just treat girls like disposable toys. We aren't here for you to play with when it suits you, and then toss in the trash when a newer, shinier one comes along. We're people with feelings. Yeah, Ma, but what if your dad did that to me? She interrupted. What if he threw me away because some other woman with a short skirt and a halter top batted her eyes at him? What if he made me cry like you did to Christina, and then shrugged his shoulders like it was nothing? How would you feel about that? That shut me up. The image of my mom running away crying sent a sick feeling to my stomach. I wouldn't like it. I mumbled. Exactly. Aren't you glad that he is a man who doesn't treat women that way? Yeah. I agreed contritely. She smiled at me and lovingly rubbed my head. Good. If you want an example of how to treat women, look to Henry. Ask him questions. He is what a real man is supposed to be. When you treat a woman like a queen, she will always treat you like a king. I snapped awake with a start. The dream, which was really just a memory from high school, was at the front of my mind. Why did I dream of my mom? My foggy brain was a bit confused as I looked around the unfamiliar room that I was laying in. As my head cleared, my memory came flooding back to me. After I left my house last night, I got a motel room. I couldn't go back home to Tabby. Her many attempts to call me just resulted in me turning off my phone. Instead of dealing with her, I got a 12-pack from the nearest gas station, as well as some questionable hot dogs. Then I proceeded to eat my gourmet meal while responsibly drinking my beverage of choice. Somehow, I woke up with 10 empty beer cans laying around. On top of that, it appears that I somehow ordered some spicy videos, which was paused on the TV. Some mature woman in a schoolgirl outfit was taking multiple so-called subjects, if you know what I mean. At the bottom of the screen, it had the title of the movie, which was Sasha Gets Schooled 3. God, they made a 1 and 2? I groaned as I groggily got out of bed and trudged to the bathroom to pee. When I returned, I turned my phone on to see what time it was. Surprisingly, it was only a little after 9. Not surprisingly, there were close to 20 missed calls, as well as 12 text messages. There were a couple from my mother, which let me know that Tabby had talked to her. No doubt Tabby let her know that I was privy to the knowledge that she was a round-heeled bitch. She was probably freaking out, hoping that I don't tell my dad. Good. I found one missed call from my dad. I didn't know what to make of that. Did he talk to Mom, or was he just calling to let me know that he made it in okay? I wanted to call him back, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to say to him. I wanted to tell him everything. He deserved to know. I was certain that Mom hadn't told him, even if he did talk to her, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It's like a mercy killing on a wounded animal. You know it's the right thing to do, but it's hard to actually follow through on the killing. Point blank, I wasn't looking forward to shattering his world. I mean, it brought me to the brink of insanity, and she's my mother. How would I feel if she were my wife? I decided to cop out. I didn't call him, but I did the next best thing. I sent him a quick text to gauge where his head was. It said, "Make it home, okay?" I figured he wouldn't answer right away, so I hopped in the shower to clean the smell of homeless wino off me. I felt refreshed until I realized that I didn't have a change of clothes. That meant that I had to put on the same stinking attire that I had on all day yesterday through a 3-hour flight, a 4-hour drive, and a pity party involving 120 ounces of beer. After that, I checked my message to see if he texted back, and found that he did. It said, "Where are you? Tabby is a wreck. Says you two had a fight and you left." So, he did talk to them. No doubt those lying women left out the reason why we fought. Now he thinks I'm the bad guy. Great. Typical. Did I know them at all? Was every woman a lying witch? It was time to take the bull by the horns. I was done shying away from what I had to do. Like I said before, he had a right to know. I shot off a final text before I gathered up my things and left the room. It said, "Meet me at Tony's. Just you. Don't tell Mom or Tabby. Please, it's important." I didn't wait for his response. I knew he would do it. I just went down to the desk to pay my bill, got a raised eyebrow for the videos I ordered, got in my truck, and drove to meet him. He arrived 20 minutes after I did. I'd already ordered his favorite pizza and drink, and it only arrived at the table a few minutes before he walked in. "Hey son, wow, pizza for breakfast? What are you on a diet?" He quipped as he sat down in the booth. I wanted to offer a jovial response, but all I could do was look solemn. He felt the mood and his smile was replaced with a look of concern. "Come on, Dre. Talk to me. What's going on?" I tried to say the words, but they caught in my throat. They didn't want to come out. They wanted to stay a dark secret, but I refused to let them. "Mom's cheating on you." I finally spit out. The words hung in the air, filling it with heaviness. It took a moment for them to sink in. I saw a confused expression turn into one of recognition. "What?" he asked with disbelief in his voice. I didn't repeat it again. I knew that I didn't have to. He heard me. More than that, he believed me. His rhetorical question was just a reflex of my message sinking in. I felt awful. The pain that showed on his face was one of complete agony. I wished that I could unsay what I just said. I wished I could jump up and yell "Gotcha." I jumped off the cliff, and there was no going back now. I wished that I didn't have to drag him with me. "When did you find this out?" he asked. His words seemed broken up as his voice cracked. "Yesterday." He shook his head sadly. "Do you know who he is?" All I could do was nod. I was getting ready to tell him, but he beat me to it by asking the follow-up question, "Was it Charles?" I gasped. "How did you know?" I asked, completely stunned. My dad became lost in his own world. He sat there, violently shaking his head. I thought that was over. I thought that she would eventually get him out of her system. I waited. I was patient. I tried to be a good husband. I gave her space. Then he slammed his fist on the table and yelled, "That witch!" "Dad," I said, taken aback by his vehement response. He looked up at me. His expression was strange. It was like he was absent. He seemed surprised that I was still here. Why am I still paying for my mistakes? Why? I did everything right. Why is this still happening to me? He cried as his body trembled. Even though he was looking at me, I don't think he was talking to me. His eyes looked glazed over, and he seemed far away. I became instantly angry. Not at him, but at the situation. I was pissed that he felt like this was his fault. I was pissed at my mother for doing this to him. I was pissed that I had to be the one to tell him. I was just pissed. "Dad, this is not your fault," I said, trying to get through to him. He just shook his head. "Yes, it is, son. It's all my fault. This is karma. I try to make things right. I tried, but it always comes back around." "What are you talking about? You're not making any sense, Dad. What did you do?" Meanwhile, Henry, about 23 years ago, the heart monitor beeped repeatedly. It should have been a blessing to hear. Each beep was a sign that my daughter was still alive. No matter how things looked, she was in there. Somewhere in there. But she really wasn't in there. Her body was physically here, carrying on its daily functions as if everything were normal. But nothing was normal. Everything that Cassie was, her very essence, was gone. Her body was just an empty shell full of moving parts. "Please, come back to me. Please. I've already lost your mom. I can't lose you too." I thought for the billionth time as I squeezed her hand. What I would have given to feel movement in the dead hand that I held. I honestly would have given everything I owned to the poor for just 5 minutes of having my baby girl open her eyes and look at me one more time. It was all a moot point by now. The long, hard decision had been made. Today was the day that I had to. Shit, I couldn't even bring myself to say it. Listening to the dispassionate doctors summarizing and hypothesizing about the state of my daughter and the likelihood that she would ever wake up made everything sound so cut and dry, so cold. It was like they were mechanics trying to convince me that the repairs on my worthless car would cost more than the car is worth. This is my daughter, goddamn it, my little girl. She's a human being, not some warm vestibule to keep donor organs intact. I wanted to be angry at the doctors. I wanted to be angry at the nurses. I even wanted to be angry at God. After all, he was the one who made it rain that night. It was his fault that the drunk driver just happened to be on that road at that exact time. He allowed that dog to run a red light and plow into my wife and child. He took them away from me. But why was she even driving that night? What was the reason that she was on that road? Where was she going? Shut up. She was going to her mother's house. She should have been at home, with you, but she wasn't. She was leaving you. Shut up. She was leaving you because she caught you. She found the credit card statement that you forgot to shred. She saw the payments for the motel. You remember the motel, don't you? It was the one where you met that woman every Wednesday. You practically paid her rent with all the money that she charged you. Your wife knew you would be there, paid the clerk for a spare key, and burst into the room. What did she see when she came in? What did she see? Shut the hell up. It was all my fault. All of it. I thought I was entitled to a little fun. After all, I brought in the big bucks. I was the man of the house. My business had started taking off. Everything was falling into place. Everything was as it should be. The only glitch was my frigid wife. She just didn't enjoy sex as much as I did. She was an excellent wife and a wonderful mother. She believed in me when everyone else said I was crazy for starting this business. It was the 90s. Real estate was the place to be. Why not go where the money is? But she knew I would make it. Even when we lived in that shabby apartment, she had faith in me. I loved her with all my heart. Unfortunately, I didn't lust after her anymore. To her, sex was a chore that she did for her husband. It was 10-15 minutes of her day, doing another wifely duty. It was on the same list as the laundry, cooking, and taking Cassie to school. It wasn't even at the top of the list either. I wanted a sex queen. I wanted someone that would moan and grind under me and tell me to drill her harder. I found such a woman. She was an escort. I found her in an ad in a local paper. This was before the internet made such things far easier. Of course, she didn't advertise herself as an escort. You had to know the language to decipher the code. Woman seeks man to share a mutually beneficial relationship was the phrase that Amber's ad used. The first time I called her, I was so nervous. I didn't know what to expect. What I got was the best sex of my life. She was exactly what I wanted in a sex goddess. Nothing was taboo to her. She loved sex, and she wasn't afraid to show it. Sex with Amber played on my conscience at first, but it became easier over time. I thought about the morality less and less, and it became a weekly appointment that I craved. If I skipped a week, I felt the effects. My mood darkened, and I became short-tempered. I even justified it in my head. It helped with the guilt. My wife didn't really enjoy having sex with me. With Amber taking the edge off, I wasn't hassling her. I was getting my needs met, and she got take a break. It should have been a win-win for everybody. I still considered myself a good husband. I didn't beat my wife, didn't even raise my voice at her. I loved her and my daughter with everything that I had. I spoiled both of them. Whatever they wanted, they got. I just had this one thing that I did. No big deal. After all the good that I did for my family, it shouldn't have mattered much. But it did matter. She didn't see it as a win-win. All she saw was the betrayal, the pain. That's why she was on that road. That's why she died on the operating table. And that's why I was saying my final goodbyes to my daughter before they pulled the plug. Meanwhile, Andre here in the present time. Dad's entire body was shaking as he was racked with tears. The only thing I could do was sit back in disbelief. This man, the one who raised me, was not the man in that story. They say that it's a sad day in any kid's life when he finds out that his parents aren't perfect. It was I think sobering is an applicable word. It had been a very sobering 24 hours. I wanted to sympathize with my dad, but I could only selfishly think about how everyone that I loved and cherished had let me down this weekend. One after another, they failed me. Piece by piece, they tore away at my foundation of what marriage was supposed to be until there was nothing left. I had no truth to hold on to. Dad, I don't know what to say. That seemed to upset him even more. The crying got another jump start, and he sobbed into his hands. I had never seen my dad cry before. Never. It was something that I hadn't ever realized until this moment. Is that why you put up with mom cheating on you? Because you felt that you deserved it? I asked. It's karma, son. You and your mother are my second chance. I owe it to my daughter to be the best dad to you that I could be, and I owe it to Cynthia, first wife, to be a great husband to your mom. Dad, that's... I stopped mid-sentence to gather my thoughts. I wanted to find a PC way to say what I wanted, but I realized that I no longer cared about being politically correct. That's bullshit. I finally spit out. He looked up at me with surprise on his face. I never cussed at my parents, but I didn't let that stop me. You think you deserve to be cheated on because you were a shitty husband to another woman over 20 years ago? That's bullshit. Plain and simple. Andre, I'm still your father. No, Dad. It's your turn to listen to me, I said vehemently. His mouth snapped shut. All my life you and Mom fed me bullshit about treating women right. Well, you treated Mom right. No matter how you treated your first wife, you did right by Mom. She had no right to cheat on you. You sitting there allowing it because of some screwed up karmic justice is a slap in the face to everything you taught me about being a man. That made him think. Things fell quiet between us, but then I noticed that he looked at me with something in his eyes. It was respect. Not general respect that he gave to me because he loved me, but the respect that a man has for another man. He nodded with a slight smile on face. He even huffed out a little laugh. It was laced with sadness, but it was still a laugh. It's not every day that a son schools his father. You mean, besides on the basketball court, right? I've taken you to school plenty of times, old man. I joked with a smirk to lighten the mood. It took him a few seconds, but eventually he gave a genuine laugh. Old man? You call me old man, yet you're the one with Alzheimer's. There is no other explanation for your memory being that bad. He responded with a pat on my shoulder. The conversation changed into a playful one, where we each tried to prove our point of who owned who on the court. We sat there for another 30 minutes or so, eating our food and having a good time with each other, despite the somber elephant in the room. I knew my dad was putting on a brave face for me. I also knew that he was dying inside. So was I. But we laughed the pain away, even if it was only for a moment. As we walked out to our cars, my dad stopped me. Hey, Andre, I just wanted to thank you. You are a man that I am proud to call son. I nodded humbly at his praise. Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. We stood there for an awkward minute before I asked, so, what are you going to do about Mom? He just shook his head and exhaled loudly. I don't know. I really don't. As long as I don't lose you, though, I'm good with whatever happens. You'll never lose me, Dad. Don't worry about that. You have to do what's good for you. He extended his hand, and I grabbed it into a firm handshake. Then, he pulled me in for a final hug. I love you, son. No matter what happens, never forget that. Ditto, Dad. Ditto. 6 months later, I knocked on the door to my parents', my mom's house. There was a time when I would have just used my key and walked in, but that time was gone. My mom and I hadn't really been getting along since I told my dad about her and Charles. She felt betrayed that I didn't come to her, and at least try to talk to her before I flew off the handle. The rift grew even larger when Dad filed for divorce. She stopped speaking to me altogether after that. She just fell into a depression, and she blamed me for her circumstances. I tried to get her to talk to me. I tried to build the bridge between us. She rejected all my attempts. I think the only thing she wanted was an apology from me. She wanted an apology from me. How backwards is that? She cheated and ripped the family apart. Yet she was the one waiting for an apology. No matter how much I valued a relationship with her, there was no way I was apologizing. If anything, she was the one who owed everyone an apology. So, we existed in that stalemate. After a month of being outright rejected, I stopped trying at all. When I gave up, a piece of me died. She was my mom, after all. No matter what, I still loved her. I was hurting too. Couldn't she see that? Things between Tabby and me took a nosedive for the worse. We existed in the same house, but I was an empty shell to her. I guess a part of me was punishing her for the part that she played in my parents' breakup. I can admit that, but a lot of it was just plain distrust. My attitude towards women in general decreased drastically. Between my mother's cheating on my day, her rejection of me and expecting apologies for the consequences of her behavior and my declining marriage, I saw little to appreciate in the opposite sex. They became lying, evil, manipulative witches to me. They were the enemy. I saw the double standards of our society as an act of war. Each time I encountered one, It enraged me. I even began a sort of boycott. I stopped opening doors for women, stopped giving up my seat if I saw a woman standing, stopped complimenting them, everything. Chivalry was dead to me. I saw it as a system of subjugation to turn men into willing lapdogs. I vowed to myself to stop being a sucker for the almighty women. No one felt this more than Tabby. She tried to apologize for lying to me. She tried to make it up to me, but I wouldn't let her. I was stuck in my universe of anger and rage. Like me, she gave up trying to get closer when she continuously encountered my harsh rejection. She didn't greet me when I came home anymore. We didn't watch TV together anymore. Our once vivacious sex life was on life support. There was no laughter, no deep talks other than the bills, no life. The only good thing that came out of it was my dad got to keep his business, which was one of his main concerns. Since it was successful before he married my mom, and his lawyer was very good, he got to keep it free and clear. He had to give her alimony though, and she got to keep the house. But compared to giving her half of his business, it was tolerable. Today, my dad told me to go visit my mom. He said she would need me. The final papers came today, and he wanted to make sure that she was okay. This was one of the times that I wished I wasn't an only child. Why couldn't I have a younger sibling who could do this instead of me? It wasn't that I didn't want to see her. I was just tired of being rejected by her. How could she expect me to become her accomplice in lying and cheating, to my own dad no less? I felt like I did the right thing. That was what they taught me to do. To stand up for what I knew was right, even when everyone else was against me. Then again, they taught me a lot of shit that they themselves didn't believe in. Why should that be any different? But I made a promise to check on her, and that brought me to her house after months of not even driving past it. After the third time knocking and not getting an answer, I thought about going home, but a promise was a promise, so I used my key and opened the door. I was slightly surprised that the locks hadn't been changed. I expected everything to look different. This place had been a home to a family once upon a time. My family. Now it was something else. It was the same as I remembered. Yet at the same time, nothing was the same. The only physical difference was the absence of all the family pictures. However, that one missing component changed everything. It made this house nothing more than a beautiful tomb. I found my mom in the living room, watching TV. In front of her on the coffee table was an unopened manila envelope. I didn't come in and sit on the couch. I just stood in the doorway and called out, "Mom? It's me, Andre." She didn't acknowledge my presence. She just sat there on the couch ignoring me like I was some ghost that she couldn't see or hear. "Mom, I know you hear me." Finally, she turned to look at me. I still saw brimming anger in her eyes, but they were mostly filled with sadness. After a moment, she turned back to the TV. "What do you want, Andre?" she asked in a bland voice. I came to check on you, to make sure you were okay," I said, trying to hold my emotions in. "I'm fine," she answered in her lifeless voice. "I'm fine" is a phrase that means something very different when spoken by a woman in that tone. It doesn't mean, "I'm okay." It actually means, "Screw off." I was almost ready to turn and leave, but I didn't. Months of being shut out all came to the surface, and it mixed into a ball of, "I don't give a shit." "You know what, Mom? You're a real bitch." That got her attention. She turned to me with her nose flaring like an angry bull's. "How dare you talk to me that way?" I didn't back down. "Oh, now you want to speak to me? Is that what I have to do to get you to acknowledge me?" She leaped off the couch and stormed over to me. "I am your mother, boy. I brought you into this world, not the other way around. Don't you ever think that you can come into my house and speak to me like that? Do you hear me?" She bellowed at me, jabbing her finger into my chest repeatedly as she did so. I stood my ground. This was the first conversation that we'd had in months, and I wasn't going to whimper away and let it die. "If you're my mother, then act like it. I'm your son, and you treat me worse than you treat a stranger in the street." Her eyes were still filled with anger. "You're my son, but that didn't stop you from stabbing me in the back." "I stabbed you in the back? What about what you did to me?" "Did to you? Did to you? Grow up, Andre. That was between me and your father. It had nothing to do with you. You ruined my family, Mom. On top of that, you stole the very foundation of my marriage from me. That has everything to do with me. Come off it, Andre." "No, Mom. Don't you get what you did to me? Everything you taught me was a lie. Everything. Remember, you told me that if I treated a woman like a queen, then she will treat me like a king. Remember that?" For the first time, she was quiet. I took this opportunity to say what I'd been desperately needing to say to her since all this started. "Growing up, you always told me to look to Dad as an example on how to treat women. I based the very idea of a man's role in relationships on that. According to your words, you should have been treating Dad like the king of kings. Yet you went out and screwed the man who treated you like trash. What does that tell me about marriage? Huh. To her credit, tears started to fall. She didn't come back with some rationalizing bullshit to turn everything around and make her the victim. She didn't look to me as a scapegoat for her situation. She just stood there and cried silently. Then, she suddenly pushed past me and ran upstairs. I stood there for a few minutes, listening out for any sounds that would let me know what she was doing. But the house was big, so I got nothing. After a minute or two of silence, I went to go find her. I found her in her bedroom. She was lying face down. Her shoulders shook as she cried. "Mom, go away, Andre." I heard her say, "Mom, please, talk to me." I pleaded. She continued to cry. I stood there in desperate silence, watching her cry. I wanted to console her, but at the same time, I wanted her to suffer. When I realized that she wasn't going to let me in, I shook my head and turned to leave. That's when I heard her talk. "Don't go," she begged in a quivering voice that was barely a whisper. It was so soft that I didn't think I heard her correctly until she said, "Please, don't go." I walked over to the bed and sat next to her prone body. As she sobbed, I gently stroked her back in an effort to soothe her. She cried into her pillow for at least an hour. I stayed with her, touching her to let her know that I was there. Even when hunger cramped my stomach, I stayed. Once she sat up, we talked. Really talked. "Why, Mom? Why?" I finally asked the question that plagued me daily. She shook her head sadly. "Because I never stopped loving Charles. He had a hold on me that I couldn't shake, even after all that he did to me." "Didn't you love Dad, though?" She looked at me for a moment, and then sadly shook her head again. "Yes and no. I did love your father. I did, believe it or not. But I was never in love with him. I didn't love him like I loved Charles. I know that you want to hear something else, but I owe you the truth now. I do believe that I could have fallen completely in love with him if I'd met him first, but I didn't." "Then why did you marry him?" She exhaled loudly and wiped a new tear that was coming down her face. "Because of you." "Huh. Henry loved you, Andre. From the moment he saw you, he loved you. The two of you formed an instant bond. Plus, he treated me nicely. We'd been dating for months when I realized that I couldn't love him like he deserved. I almost broke it off with him several times, but each time I was ready to let him go. I saw the two of you together. I couldn't bring myself to end it with him." "So, you married him?" She nodded sadly. When he popped the question, I couldn't say no. I just held on to the hope that eventually, I would fall in love with him like I did Charles. "How long were you cheating on him, Mom?" She sighed and looked down. "I don't know, for a few years. At least physically. And it wasn't a continuous thing. It was sort of on and off. While you were home, I was a good wife. I took care of my husband. I was faithful to him. I made love to him when he wanted and tried not to nag him too much. Then, not long after you started college, I saw Charles in the grocery store. It was like fate's cruel joke. He was with another woman. They were walking down the aisle, shopping for taco shells or some shit like that. He had his arm wrapped around her shoulders as he whispered in her ear. When I heard her laugh out loud, I became jealous. She huffed out a sardonic laugh. Funny, isn't it? I became jealous over a man that I hadn't seen for over 15 years. She paused as she looked off at the wall. I didn't interject anything, even when she stopped talking. This was her show, her memories. I needed to know what happened, and I didn't want to stop her flow. When he saw me, we talked for a minute. Nothing really significant. After all, he was with another woman, but I could feel the spark between us. It went straight to my stomach and sent the butterflies into a tizzy. I knew then that I was still in love with him. That selfish man. She paused once more tears streaming down her face. Still, I didn't say anything. I just waited until she picked the story back up. That's when he started calling me. I don't even know how he got my phone number, but somehow he did, and invited me to lunch. He said he wanted to apologize for how he ended things with me. So, I went to lunch with him. I didn't sleep with him that day, but it wasn't long until I crossed that line. Did you feel guilty about it? Yes, I did. All the time. The first time, I couldn't even look at Henry after I did it. I was so ashamed that I couldn't even bear to be around him. After a couple of days, I got over it. I showered Henry with love, and I told Charles that he had to leave me alone. I was a married woman, and he had to accept the fact that I'd moved on. How did it pick back up again? She gave a slight smile of nostalgia. Charles was never good at taking no for an answer. He pursued me and wore me down for months until I gave in again. That's how things continued to be with us. We would go at it hot and heavy. I would feel guilty and tell him to back off. He would relentlessly chase me down until I gave in again. It became our thing. Was it worth it? I asked. Her face darkened. It was the worst mistake of my life. She said simply. I didn't really know what I felt at this point. Anger and disappointment were definitely there, but for some reason, I also found myself feeling sorry for her. She had a long, lonely road ahead of her. Who knows, karma may even come back around for her like it did Henry. She definitely deserved it, but knowing she deserved it did nothing to quell my sympathy. After all was said and done, she was still my mother. No son with any decency could avoid feeling sympathy for his mom when she is suffering, whether she brought in on herself or not. Did he ever ask about me? I asked. I know it was selfish, but this was another question that had plagued me. I didn't even know why I cared. My dad, Henry, was and is a great dad. I didn't need or want anybody else, but there was still a feeling of rejection there. To know that the person who created me left so easily and never wanted anything to do with me left a hole that no amount of hatred could fill. Then, to find out he still sought out a relationship with my mom, or whatever their thing was, for the past few years was another slap in the face. He wanted her, but not me. That hurt. I didn't want anything to do with him, but I'd be lying if I said that it wouldn't have been nice for him at least acknowledge me. This time, it was she who looked at me with sympathy. Just a little Dre, she answered, knowing that it wasn't what I wanted to hear. He asked what was happening in your life when we first connected, and I did show him pictures of you at your wedding. I told him all about your wife and how well you were doing, but he didn't really want to see you. He was just making small talk. I couldn't help the sick feeling swirling around in the pit of my stomach. I loved my mother, but I was disgusted by her at the same time. To think that she jeopardized her marriage for this man who callously rejected her only son made me angry all over again. The very fact that she had any feelings whatsoever for this guy made it hard to move past. I fought the urge to lash out at her again. We sat on her bed quietly for a few moments. Then she reached out and grabbed my hand. Dre, I know that you're angry with me. I know that I disappointed you and probably screwed your head up with giving you advice that I didn't follow. I'm so sorry for that. What I did was selfish and hurtful, and I wish that I could take it back. I just nodded in acceptance. I couldn't look at her, so my gaze fell to the bed. She grabbed my chin and lifted my head until I was looking at her. Then she looked me right in the eyes with a stern look. Now, I know that I'm the last person to be giving you advice. I know that, but I feel like I have to tell you this before you repeat mistakes made by your parents. What mistakes? With your wife. I scoffed out a sardonic laugh. You mean the one who lied to me to cover for you, right? Yes, she lied to you. She was wrong, but I was the one who put her in that position. She found out about me and Charles by mistake. One day, she came over just as Charles was leaving. You slept with him in Dad's bed? I asked incredulously, raising my voice significantly. She shook her head vigorously. No, son. He knew Henry was out of town, and he tried to pop up unexpectedly. I didn't let things go that far. He tried, but I didn't want to do it in the house. When I realized that he was going to keep pushing it, I put my foot down and told him that he had to leave. When he left, we kissed. That's when Tabby saw us. I begged her not to tell you. I made her promise. She told me that she would keep my secret, but she wasn't happy about it. She urged me to think about what I was doing and end it. You still let him in Dad's house. You may not have slept with him, but it was still disrespectful. I know, like I said, if I could change things, I would. She said apologetically. I shook off my further disappointment in my mom and asked, so how did Tabby go from not being happy about it to covering for you? I broke it off with Charles after Tabby caught us. It was a wake-up call. I stayed clear of him for a while. During that time, Tabby and I grew closer. She really became my daughter then. I suppose that a large part of me was grateful to her, and that made me love her even more. But by that weekend that you and your father went out of town, Charles and I had started back up again. I was supposed to spend the weekend with Tabby. She and I were going to get Manus, Petus, and do a whole girl weekend thing. But then Charles called and said that he had tickets to the new ballet that was in town. I tried to cancel things with Tabby, but she was disappointed and kept asking why. She said that she was looking forward to Girls' Day Out. Because she kept pressing, I had to be honest with her and tell her the truth. I never asked her to lie to you, but I think she did it because you knew that she was supposed to be with me. She didn't want you to ask her why things got canceled. That still doesn't let her off the hook. I said. For some strange reason, I also found myself wondering what kind of man takes a woman to the ballet on Super Bowl Sunday. The kind of man who wants to get laid. That's who. I know, Dre. But don't you think she's suffered enough? Don't you think she's sorry? How long does she have to live in purgatory? I jumped up from the bed. This isn't about making her suffer. I don't trust her. She lied to me to protect you. Your little adulterous liaisons were worth more to her than I was. Her promise to you trumped her vows to me. Why would I trust her? She nodded thoughtfully. So, what are you gonna do? Why haven't you divorced her yet? If you can't trust her, you should get rid of her and move on with your life. That stopped me in my tracks. No matter what, I never seriously thought about leaving Tabby. What my mother said next sent an arrow straight into my heart. I say that because I guarantee that if you keep treating her like this, she will leave you. Right now, she's sorry for what she did. She desperately wants to rebuild your relationship, but the longer you push her out, the less it hurts. The less it hurts, the easier it becomes for her to be without you. You don't want to wake up to the day that she stops crying over you. That's when she will realize that she is better off alone than being miserable with you. Trust me on that, son. On that day, she will leave you, and there will be no turning back. As I drove home, I thought about what my mom said. Yes, I was angry with Tabby. I didn't trust her, though deep down I knew she didn't cheat on me. But she covered up for a cheater, and that was really hard for me to fathom. But I also knew that I definitely didn't want to end my marriage. Underneath all the anger, I loved her. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't make myself trust her. I couldn't make myself forget that she was capable of keeping secrets that would hurt me. Once you know that a person is capable of something, it becomes hard to expect anything less from them if the situation requires it. When I made it home, I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes. I wasn't ready to go into the house yet. I couldn't face Tabby. Once again, I was standing on the edge of a cliff. When you think about it, that's what love and trust really is. It's like jumping off a cliff. You have to trust that there is something down there that will break your fall. If not, you will only be able to watch in despair as you plummet towards an inevitable end filled with pain and death. I wanted to jump. I really did. But I couldn't. I was no longer 100% certain that there was something down there to keep me safe. My dad's voice came to me from nowhere. A latent memory of sorts from one of the many lessons he taught me. Son, when a person is faced with a seemingly impossible task, he does one of two things. He either runs away from it, or he tries to figure out how to do it. The answer doesn't always come to him right away. Sometimes, the only thing he can do is take the first step and fight like hell until an answer presents itself. If he doesn't fight, he will never be in a position to win. The only question that I had to answer was this. Was my marriage worth fighting for? Yes, it was. I loved Tabby. Unlike my parents' marriage, Tabby and I loved each other. We chose each other with no conditions, no hidden agendas. So, I took a deep breath, put one foot in front of the other, and stepped off the ledge. When I walked into my house, I found her sitting on the couch, reading a book. She looked up to acknowledge me coming in, and then she continued reading. Instead of going to another room like I'd done in the past, I came in and sat next to her. She looked up at me again, this time with surprise on her face. Tabby, we need to talk. Instantly, she tensed up and her eyes started welling up with tears. I was confused about that, but I pushed through and kept talking. I want us to go to counseling. We've been in this Cold War for too long now, and we need to do something before we end up like my parents. She exhaled in jagged breaths and sucked a large amount of air. You mean you're not? Oh my God, Andre. I thought. With that, she fell into my arms and wrapped herself around me. I felt her shaking as she cried into my shoulder. Suddenly, the reason for her odd reaction became clear. You thought I was leaving you? That made her cry even harder. Please, Dre, I'm so sorry. I should never have lied to you. I stroked her back. I know, but we have a lot more to get over than the lying. I have to trust you for us to make this work, but right now I don't. I want to. I really do, but I can't. It's not just about the lying. It's more about the reason that you did it. She let go of me and backed up so that she could look at me. I don't understand. You lied to me to help my mother cheat. To me, that says a couple of things. Number one, you don't have a problem with cheating, as long as it's the woman who gets to do it. You've told me plenty of times that if I ever cheated on you, that you would cut my balls off. Yet you had no problem with my mother cheating on my father. Number two, it shows me that you don't respect me or my feelings. You cared more about helping my mother cover up her tracks than you did about how it would affect me. Those are two big hurdles to get over. She nodded sadly. I get it. I wasn't consciously doing it for those reasons, but I can see how you can think that. I would never, ever cheat on you though. No matter what you think about me, I really need you to know that. I thought about that. I didn't like what she had done. In fact, I detested it. But I finally admitted to myself that it had to be hard for her. She was in a tough situation. Yes, she should have told me, but I get that it wasn't easy. And I did not really think that she had cheated. I know that I told her that it's logical that only somebody who approves of cheating would cover up for a cheater, but I also realized that maybe somebody who didn't know how to handle a difficult situation and was afraid to be the catalyst for blowing up a family might do what she did. Well, we'll talk about it in counseling. Like I said, we have a lot to get over, but I'm willing to work on it if you are. She hugged me once more. I'm so willing to work on it, baby. I love you so much, Andre. You're the best man I know. 1 year later, I tried to hold it in. I really did, but I couldn't. Anger overwhelmed me. There he was, not even 20 feet from me, laughing, smiling, taunting me with every breath that he drew. Why did he get to walk away unscathed? After he caused so much pain, why should he get a free pass from karma's sting? I know my dad would want me to walk away. I know that he would tell me to just let it go. I practically heard his voice, playing in my head like a mantra, but I couldn't let it go. I just couldn't. So, I walked up to him. I thought I did it pretty calmly, but some who witnessed it said that I looked like I was itching for a fight. Others said they didn't see that. I only meant to scare him a little. You know, make him feel the need to look over his shoulder at night. What I didn't expect was for him to say the one thing that would make me lose it on him and go full Hulk. Hey, I know you. You're my son, aren't you? I don't remember hitting him the first time. I don't even remember the second time. All I remember is getting pulled off him by 3 guys while he groaned on the floor. I hoped that a judge would be lenient on me. I'd never been in trouble with the law before. I was a hard worker. I was a married man with a baby on the way. Yes, Tabby was pregnant. I thought that I would get slap on the wrist. After all, I was only guilty of taking out the trash. I got lucky. First, it seems like my mom and dad finally did something together. They paid a visit to Charles in the hospital. My dad asked my mom to go get him some coffee, and when she was gone, he had a talk with Charles. Dad suggested that he drop the charges against me. He told him that he turned the other cheek when Charles screwed his wife, but he wouldn't be able to do that with his son on the line. Then, my dad leaned over until his mouth was right next to Charles's ear, and he whispered something that made his eyes grow large and put a look of fear on his face. When my mother returned with the coffee, my dad patted Charles on the chest, like they were 2 buddies. But there was something very unfriendly in his eyes. They were stone cold, practically evil. As luck would have it, Charles decided not to press charges against me. He said that he couldn't do that to his own son. His benevolence knew no bounds. The district attorney decided to press charges anyway, even without his cooperation. It didn't really go well. With the varying stories from different witnesses, it was hard to prove that it wasn't just a fight between 2 men. In the end, the case wasn't strong enough for him to pursue. He barely had enough time to put real criminals away. It wasn't worth it for him to become involved in a squabble between a father and his son. Sometimes karma works both ways. My parents never got back together, but they left most of the pain in the past. My dad stopped hating my mom after a while, and my mom was able to forgive herself. They could even be in the same room by the time their granddaughter arrived. Neither one of them ever remarried. I think both were pretty burned out on relationships. They each married the other to make up for past mistakes, and now they didn't feel the need to go down that road again. Tabby and I did go to counseling. We found a wonderful woman by the name of Bethany Carter, and she helped us immensely. It took a while for me to get over the mistrust that I had in Tabby. Also, I had to fight the urge to misdirect the anger and disappointment that I felt toward my mom onto her. No matter how hard it got, we never stopped fighting for our marriage. There were good days and bad days. After a while, there became fewer bad days. What we realized was that everything that we went through resulted in better communications between us. It turns out that when you jump off a figurative cliff, everything changes. Some things get destroyed, while other things just get damaged. However, the things that are truly unbreakable survive the fall. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.